Hi guys, I'm Kristen. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to those of you who are here for the first time. In honor of Pride Month today, I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite queer, fantasy, and sci-fi book recommendations for you to pick up. So I have a handful of fantasy and a couple sci-fi recommendations with lots of LGBTQIA plus representation. Some of them I'm going to go into a little bit more detail than others. Some of them I'm just going to briefly mention. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. The first book and series in particular that I want to recommend for this, it has to be A Chorus of Dragons series by Jen Lyons. This is the series that begins with the Rune of Kings. I have been talking a lot about this series lately because the series just concluded with the fifth and final book in the series, The Discord of Gods. Throughout this series, Jen Lyons plays a lot with the format, the structure of the books. There's often a fractured or dual timeline. The books themselves are books that our characters are writing in the world that we are reading about. So there are lots of meta components where they are talking about the fact that they are writing this catalog or analog or whatever of the events that have transpired. The author Jen Lyons plays so much with the resurrection trope, with the god trope, like what makes a god. She plays with the unlikely hero, the chosen one, the prophecy story in a series that has everything you've ever seen before. It's done in such a unique and creative way that it feels like nothing you've ever read before. Now, to talk about the kind of representation that we have in this book, it honestly has so much, and I definitely recommend you to check out the author's website where each book has AO3 tags and trigger warnings listed by the author. But just to go through some of the representation that we do have throughout this book, we have bisexual characters, we have polyamory relationships, we have ace representation, internalized homophobia, self-acceptance and coming out stories, we have transgender characters and magical transitioning stories. And not all of these storylines or representations are there right out of the gate. Some of them are journeys that we get to witness as a reader, seeing if these things develop or this acceptance develop in these characters over the course of the 5 books. This series is so fun and queer that even the author herself has described one of our characters as the ultimate disaster bisexual, and as Sarah from the channel Voyage Through Worlds likes to describe this series, it is so queer that even the giant undead kraken is in a sapphic relationship with a female dragon. The next series that I want to recommend is the Rook and Rose series, beginning with the book The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick, which is the author duo Marie Brennan and Alec Helms. There are 2 books out in the series so far, and the 3rd book is coming out next year. This is a multi-POV, mostly city-based fantasy setting where we are following our main character, Ren, who is a con artist trying to worm her way into the upper crust and noble houses within this city world, or within the city of Nadejra. One of the truly great things about this series, though, is the queer normative world that was created by the authors. While we do get some various gender and sexual identity representation throughout our main characters and our side characters, that's not necessarily the focus. It's more that you can see the normalized queerness within the societal structures of this world. Within the noble houses, within the power structures of the society, it is not based on blood relationship. Everything is based on a family register. What is important is not blood relationship, it is whether or not you are officially a family member within that register. So while this is definitely a character-focused book, the queer elements are less about the character representation and more about the ways that it has been subtly incorporated into all of the societal and governmental structures within this world, where references to these things are introduced so casually. There is a transgender side character who is introduced simply as so-and-so was born a daughter to their parents and is now a son. Continue on with the rest of who that person is. Another incident that I often think about is where one of the noble houses is proposing a marriage alliance to another family, and in their letter they say, based on your son's most recent dalliances, we believe that they would prefer to marry a woman, which we have many daughters within our house who would be eligible, but if he would prefer to marry a man instead, we also have many sons in our house that would be available for marriage as well. So it's just these very straightforward, matter-of-fact, casual references to queerness throughout the world building that make this so amazing. This is obviously, though, a book that I love for so many reasons, and you can absolutely check out my full review of this book. I also want to take a minute to talk about one of my favorite series of all time, and that is the Kushiel's Legacy series by Jacqueline Carey. This series is made up of 3 trilogies. I'm going to specifically be talking about the first trilogy, Phaedra's trilogy, but the 3rd trilogy also has a bisexual main character as well. In the first trilogy, Phaedra's trilogy, we are following Phaedra, who is a courtesan in this world where the main edict from their god Ulua is to love as thou wilt. So this is a country specifically where love is love is love. Our main character Phaedra is bisexual, and she is a courtesan who is being trained also to be a spy. And on top of that, she has been kind of touched or chosen by one of the gods within their world to receive or feel pleasure from pain. So she is a BDSM courtesan spy. For a series where the first book, Kushiel's Dart, was published in 2001, I think this book was just so ahead of its time. There are some things within the series that don't age quite as well, but overall, this is a series that really focuses on the fact that love is love. Now, this is still a country where blood lineage is important, so within the noble houses in particular, they are still expected to make a hetero marriage, but it is also a world where mistresses and official consorts and that kind of thing is also normalized. This series is very political overall because Phaedra is always trying to figure out some sort of political scheme that is happening using her wiles. It is also a series where some things are fixed because Phaedra is just that good at sex, but there's like a god, like she's God chosen to be this good at what she does, so you can sort of, you know, let it pass for that. And our unlikely hero, Phaedra, is just so lovable and has the most amazing character growth over the course of the series. Okay, for the remaining books and series I'm going to recommend, I'm just going to briefly tell you a little bit about the book and the representation and just kind of quickly skim through the rest of these. So the next series I want to recommend is the God King Chronicles by Mike Brooks, beginning with the book The Black Coast. I have only read the first book in this series so far, so I can't comment on what happens in The Splintered King, and the third and final book in this trilogy is coming out in June, I believe. Now, this is a book and series that is all about culture clash and the extent to which even differences in language can impact cultural variation and differences. And the three different cultures at play in this book all have very different views about gender and sexuality. We have one culture where gender identity and gender fluidity is of the utmost importance. We see this in their language, where they have several different pronouns and different inflections of various pronouns to express their own identity. Then we have a culture that seems very rigid, very conservative, and extremely misogynistic, but where varied sexual preferences has been completely normalized. And then we have our third culture that on the surface appears very liberal, very egalitarian, but that turns out to have some pretty shocking beliefs about sexuality. So far in the first book, the POV relationships have been only heterosexual, but I don't know if that changes in the future books, as I haven't read the second or third one yet, so we'll see if that changes. But ultimately, I just think that it is really interesting how the author has used language and these cultural differences to explore the ideas, and how no one culture feels like they have everything figured out just right. Next up, I want to recommend Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. This is the first book in a duology, but the book does work completely as a standalone. We are following a main character, Vasya. This is a Goose Girl retelling told from the usually villainous perspective of the servant who steals the identity of a princess. And the added component here is that the thief, who is now in the identity or appearance as this princess, is also moonlighting as a jewel thief. So she is sort of like a jewel thief con artist who is about to get caught. That is the premise for the story. And in this book, we have some ace representation, specifically demisexual representation. This book is so fun and quirky. I have done a full review for it. If you want to hear more about that, you can check that out. Another book that I'd like to recommend really quickly is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mutar and Max Gladstone. This is a sci-fi speculative novella. It is quite short, and I just recently actually got a physical copy, so I'm excited to feature it here in a video for the first time. This follows two sort of spies on opposing sides of this futuristic time-traveling war, but all of that, all of the like sci-fi speculative world building is sort of the background color commentary of one of the most beautiful romantic stories that you could possibly imagine. Now, our main characters, Red and Blue, do technically use she pronouns throughout the length of the book that focuses both parts of the story where they are sort of on a mission, and then also a section where they are writing each other letters. So because the two characters, Red and Blue, both use she pronouns, this has been described as a sapphic romance, and it has even gotten a little bit of heat from the LGBT community because it was written by two heterosexual authors. Now, for me, how I interpreted this book, because the two characters are not fully human and they don't always even live in female bodies or human bodies, I really honestly felt like this book was not about a sapphic relationship. I just felt like it was about a relationship between two people where gender was completely not part of the conversation at all. So this book really just felt like a book about love, period, and less so about sapphic love. So I feel like I've almost just talked myself out of the fact that this is a queer book, but I feel like this is a queer book. It is a book where the gender of the people within a relationship is not important. It is just about two people falling and being in love. And it does so quite beautifully, if I do say so myself. Another sci-fi speculative book that I wanted to quickly include is The Space Between Worlds by Messiah Johnson. This is a book where they have discovered, or at least in one universe, they have discovered how to travel to the various alternate universes. The catch is that you can only travel to a world where you do not exist. So you have to have already died in a world in order to travel there. So the one thing about our main character is that she has died in the majority of the currently known worlds, which makes her extremely valuable to the company that does all of this interdimensional traveling. But what it is a really intense exploration about the potential of what could have been, or who you could have been, or how you could have been, or how your life could have changed or looked differently. And she, our main character, is seeing all of these different various iterations of how her life could have been, including who she could have been with in various times. So over the course of the book and seeing the different versions of the lives that our main character has led, we get to see our main character with both men and women over the course of her various lives that she is exposed to. Let's say that. It's really hard to talk about this without being spoilery. I really loved like all of the conversations that this book had, but I will say that there was definitely some pacing issues and a little slightly anticlimactic ending, but overall I did really love what this book talked about. Going in the totally opposite direction here, if you are looking for something a little more smutty and you have not checked out The Captive Prince by C.S. Passat, I would absolutely recommend doing that. This is an Achillean relationship between Prince Damien and Prince Laurent, I believe are their names. Damien, Deimos, something like that. I would definitely describe this as a fantasy romance where the fantasy elements are just basically non-existent. And one of our main characters, one of our POV characters, Prince Damon, is supposed to inherit the throne, but his half-brother overthrows him and secretly sells him as a sex slave to their country's biggest rival. And specifically, he is given to Prince Laurent. So definitely some content warnings for sex trafficking and slavery here. You are welcome to look that up. I would say from my reading, the sex slave part of it was not romanticized in any way. It is about how the relationship develops after the fact. Outside of the romance, it is very political and schemy, as there is like tension happening between the two countries. And there's also some past trauma in Laurent's life, so you can look up content warnings for that as well. But this is quite the slow burn Achillean romance. So if you're looking for something a little bit on the steamier end, this is worth checking out, at least in my opinion. Okay, so those are all of my queer sci-fi and fantasy recommendations for you. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I'm not exactly like a big planner of my books and the books that I read, which means that right now is when I'm thinking about what are all of the queer fantasy and sci-fi books that I want to pick up moving forward. So let me know your queer book recommendations that you think I would like or that you think other people should know about. Put them in the comments down below. We'll do a rainbow emoji if you just want to let me know that you were here, that you made it this far in the video. I hope everyone has a fabulous month of June, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great day. Bye.